The night was quiet. Too quiet. Crickets chirped in rhythm with the warm Texas breeze, and the old windmill by the barn creaked just once before going still. The stars, usually a comforting blanket above Jack Collins' ranch, now seemed to hold their breath. Jack sat on the porch in his worn denim jacket, boots kicked up on the railing, a black coffee steaming in one hand. His German shepherd Rex lay beside him, ears twitching, and then pop! A single gunshot cracked through the darkness. Rex bolted upright, snarling. Jack didn't move. Not yet. He set his mug down with eerie calm and whispered, "Stay low, boy." Then came the shouting, Spanish, loud, angry, chaotic. 3 black SUVs tore through the dirt road that led up to the ranch, kicking dust into the moonlight. Men with rifles jumped out, dressed in jeans, bulletproof vests, and cartel tattoos. They moved fast like they'd done this 100 times before. They hadn't. Not here, not to him. Jack stood up slowly and stepped inside. No panic, no noise, just precision. He reached under the floorboard of his kitchen. Click. Lifted a steel hatch. Beneath it, something no one in this quiet Texas town knew existed. A weapons cache so well organized it could have been straight. Out of a military forward operating base, in seconds Jack was no longer a farmer. He was a ghost. Out by the barn, 2 men tried cutting the chain on the livestock gate. "Cierra la puerta, rápido! Get the horses, grab anything we can sell!" One of them lit a cigar, laughing, until a shadow darted past. "¿Qué fue eso?" he said, spinning around. Too late. Jack dropped from the rafters like a wraith, wrapped his arm around the man's neck, and choked him out in 5 seconds flat. The other tried to run, but slipped on hay soaked in oil, falling hard. Crack Jack's boot came down fast, snapping the man's wrist clean. "Wrong farm," Jack whispered, tying them with baling twine like hogs for slaughter. Closer to the house, more invaders were already inside. They flipped couches, smashed windows, kicked down doors. "¿Dónde está el dinero? El viejo farmer Cotien Majau?" They found nothing, only a framed photo on the wall. Jack, in full Delta Force gear, standing beside men in Black Ops uniforms. The words Operation Silent Dagger, classified 2003, were half burnt into the frame. One thug laughed, "Mira esto, viejo loco nkimin la Rambo." And then, boom, smoke grenade, flashbang. A wall of light and thunder. Jack stormed in, goggles on, rifle up, sweeping the room with surgical accuracy. He didn't miss, he didn't hesitate, one down. Another disarmed with a knife throw so quick it never made a sound. The last man dropped to his knees, screaming in fear. Jack knelt down beside him, voice ice cold. "Who sent you?" I don't know his name, man. Some guy down in Sonora. Said this was just a farm. Said it was easy money." Jack stared through him like a hawk watches prey. "Now you know better." He hit the radio on the man's vest. "Los Perros Verdes, come in, objective complete." Silence. Then, "What the hell, Javier? Why aren't you answering?" Jack picked up the mic, voice low. "This is your ghost. Come find me." He tossed the radio into the fire. By sunrise, the sheriff was at the scene, wide-eyed, confused. "Jack, what the hell happened here?" Jack simply tossed a shovel toward the nearest cartel member, groaning on the ground. "You're going to want to dig a holding pit. They'll wake up eventually." "Sheriff." Nolan scratched his head. "Jesus, I thought you were just growing strawberries and feeding horses." Jack walked past him without a word, heading back to his porch like it was just another Tuesday. As the dust settled and the morning light crept across the blood-stained gravel, the weight of what just happened hadn't even begun to register for the town, but it would, because this was just the beginning. And somewhere, deep in the Sonoran desert, the man who ordered the raid was already hearing the news. He leaned back, in his leather chair, sipping tequila. "That gringo farmer, he took out how many?" His right-hand man nodded. 7, all trained, all armed." The boss smirked. "So be it. Let's send 20. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? You'd never know by looking at him. Gray in his beard, calluses on his hands, wears the same boots every day and tips his hat to anyone who drives by. To most folks in town, Jack Collins was just that quiet guy who sold fresh eggs at the farmer's market and fixed broken fences for free. But that night changed everything. And for the first time in years, the ghosts came back. 25 years. Earlier, Fallujah, Iraq, move, move, move. Gunfire echoed through the ruined city as smoke billowed from a blown-out minaret. Jack led the squad down a back alley, hand signals sharp and confident. His eyes swept every window, every rooftop. Nothing escaped him. He was fast, precise, and brutal when he needed to be, but he never let it show. They called him the Ghost because he'd disappear into the dark and leave enemies wondering if they'd imagined him, until it was too late. Operation after operation. Mission after mission. Rescues, takedowns, assassinations. Jack was the guy they sent in when nobody else could get it done. Delta Force's elite within the elite, but the job had a cost. Back in Texas, present day, Jack stood in front of a wooden box he kept beneath the barn floorboards. Inside, medals, dog tags, old photos, and one folded American flag. He took out a photo of her, Caroline, his wife. Long auburn hair, soft laugh, eyes that could calm him down even when the world was on fire. And next to her, their daughter Emily, 7 years old, holding up a finger painting of their family. That photo had been taken 3 weeks before the car crash. He'd been deployed. Some deep black op in eastern Syria. He wasn't even allowed to say where. But when he got the news, it shattered him. Caroline and Emily gone in an instant. Hit by a drunk driver on Route 287. Broad daylight, no chance to say goodbye. Jack didn't cry, he didn't scream, he just shut off. 6 months later, honorable discharge. Collins, you sure about this? The general across the desk looked at him with something like pity, or maybe fear. Jack wasn't sure anymore. I'm done, he said flatly. I gave everything I had. You still have more to give. Jack looked him dead in the eyes. Not anymore. They gave him medals. A handshake, a quiet exit through the back, and just like that, the Ghost was gone. 3 years ago, the ranch Jack bought 60 acres of land no one else wanted. Rocky soil, run-down house, broken fences. He fixed it all himself. Piece by piece, built a new barn, raised chickens, learned how to grow his own food. Some called it off-grid. For Jack, it was survival. Not from enemies, but from the weight of memory. He took in wrecks from a shelter, found peace in the silence of early mornings and honest work. The townsfolk liked him enough, though nobody really knew him, except Mary, his neighbor from 2 miles down the road, a widow in her 70s with a sharp wit and a warm heart. She'd drop off pies, trade seeds, and gossip about people Jack never remembered. She never asked about his past. And he never offered. But her grandson, Luke, 14 and full of fire, looked up to Jack like a father figure. You ever fight in a war? Luke asked one day. Jack looked at him. I fought for peace. That was the most he'd ever said. Now, post-raid Jack loaded the unconscious cartel men into the sheriff's van himself. Where'd you learn to do all that? Sheriff Nolan asked. Still stunned by the battlefield efficiency, Jack didn't answer. Just lit a cigarette and stared off toward the horizon. Inside the barn, Rex sat guard near the weapons hatch. Jack covered it again with floorboards, ceiling, away the past, for now. But he knew something the sheriff didn't. The men who came last night weren't the real threat. They were a test, a feeler. Someone out there had marked his land, and that someone didn't realize who they were dealing with. In a dusty cantina deep in Sonora, a call came through to a man known only as Miguel El Rey, a cartel boss with American blood on his hands, and ambition burning in his eyes. Your men failed, the voice on the phone said. Did they at least get the stash? No. They didn't even get through the front gate. There's something off about this guy. El Rey leaned forward. What's his name? Jack Collins. The name didn't mean much, not yet, but it would, because when you raid a ghost's home, you better be ready to be haunted. The Texas sun rose soft and golden, casting long shadows across the open fields. The dew still clung to the tall grass, and the chickens pecked at the dirt like nothing had ever happened, like there hadn't been. A gunfight in the middle of the night, like 7 armed men hadn't been taken down by one man who wasn't supposed to be anything but a farmer. Jack Collins wiped sweat from his brow, set down a bucket of feed, and stretched his shoulders. His back ached, a familiar ache, part age, part memory. He still moved like a soldier even though he hated it. He tried to focus on routine. It helped. Feed the animals, check the fences, repair the broken gate where one of the SUVs had crashed. Through, replace the tire marks with fresh gravel, make it disappear, just like always. At around 10 a.m., Mary's old blue pickup truck rumbled up the dirt road, bumping like it might fall apart at any second. She stepped out wearing a straw hat and carrying a peach cobbler covered with foil. "You look like hell," she said with a smile. Jack managed a half smile. "Thanks, Mary. You always know how to sweet-talk a man. I saw the sheriff's lights here last night. You okay?" Jack hesitated. "Had a few trespassers, nothing I couldn't handle." She raised an eyebrow. "Trespassers don't usually leave in zip ties." Jack didn't answer. Mary didn't press. She just handed him the cobbler. "Figured you could use something warm," he nodded. "Appreciate it." Inside, Jack cut 2 slices, one for him, one for Rex. The dog wolfed it down like a starved wolf, tail wagging like nothing had happened either. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling. Something was off. This wasn't just some desperate grab-and-go job. These guys had gear, tactical vests, encrypted radios, military-style comms. And they didn't panic when things went south. That was what scared him most. They were trained. Someone had sent them, and they'd be back. Later that afternoon, Luke rode up on his dirt bike, kicking up dust like a wild colt. His helmet was too big for him, his backpack slung halfway off his shoulder. He didn't even say hello, just jumped off and said, "Did you really take out all of them by yourself?" Jack glanced at him. "That's not something to brag about. But you did it, right? Like real-life Call of Duty stuff?" "Luke," Jack said, quieter now. "That's not a game. Those men came here to kill." Luke's face fell. "Sorry. I just thought it was badass." Jack let the silence stretch before he said, "You got homework?" Luke shrugged. "Math. I suck at it." "Bring it inside. I'll help." That was Jack's way of saying, "Stay close." As the sun dipped lower, Jack walked the perimeter of his land. He stopped at the edge of the east fence line where the grass met a patch of rocky hillside. That's where he saw it. A cigarette butt. Fresh. Still warm. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat on the porch again. Same chair, same boots, same black coffee. But this time, the rifle leaned against the wall beside him. Rex lay still, but his ears twitched every time the wind rustled the trees. Jack scanned the horizon. Every inch of his land burned into his memory like a battlefield map. Someone had been here watching, testing his defenses. He could feel it in his bones. Miles away, Sonora Desert, Mexico L. Ray sat in a cigar-smoke-filled room surrounded by his lieutenants. His mood had shifted from amused to intrigued. "This Jack Collins?" he said, tapping his fingers on the table. "What do we know about him now?" One of his men pulled out a tablet, showed a blurry satellite image of Jack's farm. "He's not registered as military, no criminal record, keeps to himself." El Rey smirked. "That's what makes me nervous." He leaned forward. "Send in the scouts. I want eyes on him, day and night." "And if he sees them?" El Rey grinned. "Then we'll know what kind of man we're dealing with." Back at the ranch, Jack finally stood up, eyes locked on the tree line. He knew he wasn't alone anymore. They weren't done, and neither was he. The small town of Dry Creek, Texas, had a population just under 3,000 and a collective sense of mind your own business. Most folks kept to themselves unless there was a county fair or high school football game. So when Sheriff Nolan tried to explain what happened at Jack Collins' ranch, people mostly just shrugged. "Probably just some junkies," said Hankett. "So the gas station. Old Jack's always been weird," added Marlene from the diner. "Probably just made the whole thing up to scare off kids." No one believed it could be something bigger, except Jack, and maybe Luke. It started with small things. A drone buzzing overhead during breakfast, a tire track near the back fence, deep tread, not local, a fresh cut in the wire, expertly patched. With tape, not an animal, a person, a skilled one. Jack documented everything. He had a system, photos, logs, sketches, maps. The ranch, once a place of healing, was beginning to feel like a war zone again. He kept it quiet, but he knew it was. Time to talk to the sheriff again. At the sheriff's office, Nolan leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee, boots on the desk. You're telling me someone's flying recon drones over your property now? Yes, Jack replied calmly. Could be a kid with a hobby drone. Jack pulled a USB drive from his pocket, dropped it on the desk. Night vision footage, multiple thermal signatures. They're observing, recording coordinated movements. Nolan blinked. Where the hell did you get night vision footage? Jack didn't answer. Nolan sighed. Jack, I'm not saying I don't believe you, but this isn't Baghdad. There's Dry Creek. Jack stepped forward, voice low. Exactly, and when this town becomes a battlefield, you won't see it coming. Nolan leaned in. Look, I get it. You've seen things the rest of us haven't. But maybe you're seeing ghosts that aren't there. Jack stared him down. You think I want this? I'd give anything to be wrong. But you need to be ready. The sheriff didn't say a word. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Luke had started showing up more often. Jack never told him to stay away, but he didn't exactly encourage it either. Still, the kid was smart. Too smart. You've got cameras in the trees, Luke said casually, looking out at the fence line. I saw the lenses glint in the sun. Jack glanced at him. Notice that, huh? Luke shrugged. You building a war or something? Jack stared at the boy for a moment. No, I'm trying to stop one. Luke didn't press, but something in his expression shifted, part fear, part awe. He didn't see Jack as just a neighbor anymore. He saw a soldier. That night, Jack sat at his kitchen table sharpening a hunting knife, not because he needed to, just for the rhythm, the calm of it, until Rex growled, low, long, focused. Jack stood up slowly, moved to the window. Nothing. He killed the lights, slipped on his night vision goggles. There, two figures, lying prone. Watching. He didn't go after them, not yet. Let them think he hadn't seen. Sonora, Mexico. El Rey's compound El Rey stood over a map lit by lanterns. His lieutenants circled him like wolves waiting for meat. The scouts say the gringo's farm is rigged. Cameras, motion sensors. The man sleeps with a rifle. Former Special Forces? El Rey nodded. Confirmed. Delta, and not just regular. One of the black bag ones, Tier 1. The room went quiet. Do we pull back? Someone asked. El Rey smiled. No, we double down. He stepped toward the map, tapped a point near the north of Jack's property. There's a boy. The old woman's grandson. He visits the ranch often. A cruel grin crept across his face. We'll start with him. Dry Creek. Back in town, Mary didn't notice the strange SUV parked across the street from her house. Why would she? People visited all the time, but Rex did. When Jack drove into town for supplies, Rex barked loud, angry, wild. Jack turned, eyes narrowing. The SUV pulled away. Fast. Too fast. Back at the ranch, Jack loaded a shotgun and locked the barn. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but something deeper, something older. He'd wanted peace. He'd earned peace. But they wouldn't let him have it. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the words of his old commanding officer echoed, You can leave the battlefield, Jack, but the battlefield never leaves you. The night air hung heavy. No breeze, no stars. Even the crickets had gone silent. Jack stood on the roof of his barn, crouched low, eyes behind infrared binoculars. Rex sat beside him, motionless. Below, the ranch looked calm, lanterns glowing. Warm on the porch, soft music playing from the kitchen window. But it was all bait, because Jack knew they were coming. Not the scouts this time, the killers. Earlier, that day, Intel confirmed Sheriff Nolan called with a voice tight and careful. We found a burned-out van 3 miles south of town. Bullet holes. Cartel tags spray-painted on the rocks nearby. Same symbol from the guys you took down. Jack didn't say anything. He just loaded a crate of claymores into his truck bed. Jack, I'm telling you this as a friend. This thing's about to explode. Jack replied quietly. It already has. 10:42 p.m. Perimeter breach. The sensors lit up. Zone 3, west fence line, 4 targets. Then Zone 5, north ridge, 2 more. They were splitting up, trying to flank him. Smart, not smart enough. Jack moved quickly, efficiently, quiet as death. He switched his monitor feed to thermal. 6 bodies, heat signatures glowing like fireflies. They were heavily armed, AKs, flashbangs. at least one with a scoped rifle. He armed the tripwires, activated the silent perimeter alarms, flicked a switch that killed every light on the ranch, and became the ghost again. The strike begins. The first cartel unit reached the horse pen, moving slow, scanning the dark. Then, boom! A flashbang wired to the fence went off in a blinding burst of light and smoke. Screaming. One man fired blindly. Another hit the dirt, ears ringing. From the shadows, Jack moved like a wraith. He dropped the first man with a suppressor shot straight to the knee, then disarmed the second with a brutal elbow strike to the throat. He whispered into the wounded man's ear, "Tell them I see everything." Then he vanished. The North Ridge team saw the explosion. "Go, go, go!" One shouted, breaking into a sprint toward the barn. Mistake. As they crossed the open field, Jack detonated a buried claymore. K-boom. Shrapnel tore the night apart. One man flew backward. The other screamed, his legs shredded. Then came the final. Move. Jack stepped out of the tree line, shotgun raised. "Drop it," he said. The man turned, gun shaking. Jack fired once, then silence. Mary's house. 3 miles away. Luke stared out the window. "Grandma, did you hear that?" Mary nodded slowly. Sounded like thunder, but she knew better. Something was happening, and Jack was in the middle of it. Again. Back at the ranch by 3 a.m., it was over. 6 men down, 2 dead, 4 unconscious, and zip-tied to fence posts, groaning, through broken ribs and ruptured eardrums. Jack stood over them with cold, deliberate stillness. He'd left one awake, the leader, blood on his face. Rage in his eyes, Jack knelt. "Tell El Rey this isn't a farm, this is a graveyard." The man spat at him. Jack wiped the spit from his cheek and said calmly, "Then let him dig it himself." Across the border, El Rey's compound, the message came at dawn. 6 men lost, no intel gained. The only thing left was a recording Jack had slipped into one of the men's pockets, audio of him saying, "You're at war now, you just don't know it yet." El Rey slammed the glass bottle off his table. "He wants war," he growled. "We'll give him hell." He turned to his second-in-command. "Gather the others, we're going to Texas." Back in Dry Creek Sheriff, Nolan arrived before sunrise, saw the bodies, the wreckage, the smoke. What the hell happened here? Jack said nothing, just handed him a note with coordinates and said, 4 of them are still alive. Tell Homeland. Security, I did half their job for them." Nolan looked around, overwhelmed. "Jack, this is war." Jack looked off toward the sunrise. "No," he said, "war was easier. The morning after the assault felt strange, too still, too normal." Birds chirped. The breeze whispered through the mesquites. The blood had already dried on the gravel near Jack's barn. He stood with his coffee, looking out across his land, but he didn't see the ranch. He saw the battlefield, every movement. Every mistake, every man he let live, was that a mercy or a miscalculation? Dry Creek, Town Square, 11:12. A.M. Maline's diner was half full. Farmers, truckers, a few old-timers playing dominoes near the window. The smell of bacon and black. Coffee hung in the air. Mary had just sat down with Luke, who was chugging orange juice like he hadn't slept. "You're jittery today," she said. Luke nodded. "Something's coming, I can feel it." Before Mary could answer, boom. Glass shattered. A car outside exploded into flames. People screamed. The dominoes hit the floor. Men in black masks kicked in the door, rifles raised. "Todos al piso, get on the floor." They moved fast. 2 inside, 2 outside, corralling people, pointing weapons, shouting names. But they weren't there to rob. They were there for someone, Jack's ranch, just before the phone rang, not Jack's cell. The old landline he almost never used. He picked it up. "Mr. Collins," the voice on the other end rasped in thick accented English. Calm. Cold. "Did you think this was over?" Jack didn't say anything. "I told them we'd come for your house, but now I think we'll come for your neighbors." A beat. "Ever hear a boy scream, Jack?" The line went dead. Jack dropped the phone and bolted out the door. Marlene's diner, minutes later. The lead gunman grabbed Mary by the hair and dragged her to the front of the diner. Luke kicked and screamed, trying to stop them. "Shut him." "Stop," the man barked. The second gunman slammed the butt of his rifle into Luke's ribs. Mary screamed, "Stop it." "He's just a boy." The man cocked his gun. "Then maybe we start with you." The situation was spiraling fast. Too fast. But before the trigger could be pulled, crack! A single suppressed shot shattered the silence. The gunman by the window dropped instantly, bullet through the eye, then chaos. Smoke poured in through the back door, blinding the room. The second man fired wildly, hitting nothing. In the smoke, something moved, fast, low, silent. Thud, a hard takedown. Snap, an elbow. Broken, then silence again. When the smoke cleared, both gunmen were on the ground, alive but groaning, and in the middle of it all stood Jack Collins, dark jacket, gloves, rifle in one hand, sidearm in the other. Marlene whispered, "What the hell?" Luke stared like he was watching a superhero movie in real life. But Mary, she just looked at Jack and said, "You brought this here, didn't you?" Outside, the aftermath Sheriff Nolan showed up again. Sirens wailing, backup rolling in late as usual. "What the hell happened?" he shouted, eyes darting between the wrecked car, the shell casings, and the terrified civilians. "They came for them," Jack said, pointing at Mary and Luke. "Not for me." Nolan rubbed his face. "Jesus Christ." Jack pulled a flash drive from his coat and handed it over. "Security footage. They weren't here to rob anyone. They came to send a message." Nolan looked at it like it was a live grenade. "And what's the message?" Jack met his eyes. "No one around me is safe anymore." Later that night, the barn Jack sat in the shadows cleaning his weapons, not as a routine this time, but as a ritual, as preparation. Rex sat nearby, ears up, tail still. Jack glanced at the old flag in the wooden box again. Folded, pristine. Beside it, his Delta dog tags. He picked them up. Felt the weight, not just of the metal, of everything, across the border, El Rey's compound. El Rey laughed when he heard the update. They were rescued? By one man? Again? He wasn't laughing long. A soldier brought in a drone photo. Look, the image showed Jack's ranch. Defensive patterns, barricades, even dug foxholes near the tree line. "This man," the soldier said, swallowing hard, "he's preparing for a siege." El Rey crushed his glass in his hand, blood dripping down. "His wrist? Then we'll give him one." The sun hadn't risen, but Jack was already on the move. The truck engine hummed low as it bounced over the dirt roads. A heavy, cold silence wrapped around the ranch, like the calm before a storm. This isn't just my fight anymore, Jack thought. He had already made his decision. He couldn't let the cartel pick off the people around him one by one, not while he was still breathing. He was done hiding. Back in town, the streets of Dry Creek were eerily quiet as Jack drove in. His truck kicked up dust in its wake, the only sound breaking the stillness. People still hadn't fully grasped what was happening. They hadn't seen what he'd seen. The destruction, the blood, the ruthless men in black masks. But today, they were going to understand. Jack parked outside the sheriff's office, his eyes scanning the small town, the old buildings, the quiet storefronts. It was like a painting that was about to be torn apart. Sheriff Nolan was just getting out of his cruiser when Jack slammed the truck door. He paused when he saw Jack approach, his face hardening. He'd seen the warning signs. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" Nolan said. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the back of the truck and pulled out a heavy box. He set it down with a thud on the sidewalk. "What's that?" Nolan asked, stepping closer, his tone wary. "Options," Jack replied grimly. The box clicked open, revealing stacks of military-grade weapons, rifles, grenades, body armor, everything needed to turn this town into a fortress. "You're giving them to us?" Nolan asked, still skeptical. "No," Jack said, eyes narrowing. "I'm asking you to take them. Your choice. Take these, arm yourselves, and fight with me, or sit back and watch your town burn, because I won't fight alone." Nolan swallowed, hard, glancing around at the townspeople who were slowly gathering. The farmers, the shopkeepers, the old men, ordinary people who had never picked up a gun. But now, they were going to have to. Jack pulled out a piece of paper, a map of the town, and spread it across the hood of his truck. "Here's the plan. They'll come in waves and they'll target the weak points. We set up barricades here, and here." He marked off spots near the bank, the gas station, and the main street. "This is the line. You want to stay alive? You want to protect your families? Then you stand with me." Nolan studied the map for a long time, then looked back at Jack. The sheriff was a man who understood the law, not war. But war was coming. "You're asking them to fight," Nolan said quietly. "No," Jack said, locking eyes with him. "I'm asking them to survive." The call goes out. It was a strange sight. Those who had lived through peaceful lives now sitting in the sheriff's office, listening to Jack's briefings, testing weapons, learning the basics of survival. By noon, the town was preparing for something it had never seen. They were forming lines in the dirt, not just around their homes but around their lives, the line between who they were before and who they had to become to protect what they had. In the diner, Marlene stood by the window, watching as a few of the more seasoned ranchers armed themselves, faces grim. "Is this really happening?" she asked, more to herself than anyone else. Mary was sitting at a table, holding Luke's hand tightly, her knuckles white. She looked out at the people, many of whom were strangers to her. And yet somehow, she knew them all now. They were the last. Line of defense. The cartel moves an hour later. Across the border, El Rey was watching. He was done playing games. His men had taken a beating and his pride burned. This wasn't a random assault anymore. This was personal. Jack Collins had taken down half his men. But more than that, he had insulted him. And no one insulted Ellie. Ray, his men were already crossing the river, heading toward Dry Creek. "We hit them tonight," El Rey said, a sneer twisting his lips. "We show them what happens when they mess with the wrong people." His lieutenant nodded, his eyes sharp. "We go in hard. No more subtlety. We hit everything." El Rey smirked. "Yes, but we start with the boy, the one who's been meddling. In our business, we make sure Jack sees what it costs to fight against us." Back in town, 2 p.m., the clock was ticking. The town of Dry Creek was ready, or at least they thought they were. Jack was certain some of them had no idea just what they were about to face. He sat in the sheriff's office, watching the map, reviewing his strategy. Nolan was with him, checking radio frequencies, preparing for the worst. "The minute they show up, we light 'em up," Jack said coldly. "They're going to hit from the east first. That's where the river's closest." Nolan gritted his teeth. "And the boy?" Jack didn't answer at first. He couldn't. He was too focused. On the map. But Nolan pressed, his voice laced with fear. "Jack, you can't let them hurt Luke." Jack finally looked up at him, his gaze hard as stone. "No one will touch him, not on my watch." But deep down, Jack knew the truth. The cartel didn't care who they hurt, not when they wanted to make an example out of someone. And they wanted to make an example out of him. The sun dipped low behind the horizon, casting a red glow over the dry fields. It wasn't just the end of the day. It was the beginning of something else. The final moments of peace before the war would come crashing in. Jack stood at the east perimeter, watching the line of makeshift barricades. The town was ready, or as ready as they could be, armed with whatever they could find, old hunting rifles, shotguns, a few handguns, and Jack's stash of military-grade weapons. He glanced down at his wristwatch. 8:57 p.m. The cartel would hit soon. He could feel it. "In his bones, Sheriff," he said, voice low. "You know what to do." Nolan looked back at him, his face grim but determined. The sheriff had spent most of his life enforcing laws, not fighting wars. But now, he wasn't just a lawman. He was the last line of defense. "I'll make sure." "The townspeople hold their ground," Nolan said, checking his sidearm. I'll take the front," Jack interrupted, scanning the distance. "You keep an eye on the main street. They'll try to split us up. If you see movement, radio in." Nolan gave a stiff nod, then disappeared into the shadows. The cartel approaches, 9:05 p.m. out. Beyond the town, through the long stretches of dry fields, the cartel's convoy began to assemble. A dozen vehicles, SUVs, trucks and motorcycles, each loaded with men, weapons and supplies. They moved in formation. Lights off, silent except for the hum of engines in the night air. El Rey's voice echoed through the intercom in one of the trucks. "Take no prisoners, make them suffer. Show them what happens when they defy me." The men nodded, their faces cold, masked. They were ready. But what they didn't know, they were about to walk into a hell of their own making. The first assault. 9:10 p.m. Jack's hand gripped his rifle tightly as he crouched behind a dirt embankment. His eyes scanned the horizon, watching the cartel's convoy moving in fast. The silence was broken by the distant rumble of engines and the crunch of tires on dirt. His earpiece crackled to life. "Sheriff's team is in position," Nolan's voice came through, steady. "Ready when you are." Jack nodded and took a deep breath. The moment was here. He clicked the switch on his belt, silent alarm for the town. Within seconds, he heard the pop of gunfire in the distance. The town was awake now. The first shots had been fired. The cartel would be too distracted by the town's defenses to expect the kind of hell Jack was about to unleash on them. The ambush, 9:20 p.m. Jack waited until the first vehicle approached. It was a black SUV, its headlights cutting through the dark. He exhaled slowly, then activated the explosive charges he'd planted along the east perimeter. Boom! The explosion shook the ground, sending the SUV careening off course, crashing into a nearby tree. The sound of metal twisting and the roar of flames filled the air. The cartel responded quickly, guns out shouting orders, but they were disoriented, scattered, and that's when Jack struck. He moved like a shadow, his body a blur as he darted between cover. He took out the first gunman with a headshot, then moved on to the next, his silenced pistol barking in the night. Each shot was precise, clean, no wasted movement. He wasn't fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting to make them pay. The town erupted into chaos as the cartel started returning fire, the sound of gunshots mixing with screams. Nolan's voice came through Jack's earpiece, sounding strained. "We're taking hits, Jack. They're pushing hard from the east side." "I'm on it," Jack replied, already sprinting toward the heart of the town. Town Square, 9:30 p.m. The townspeople were holding their ground, but it wasn't easy. The cartel was relentless, pushing through every barricade. But Jack had known this would happen. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the soul of the town. He reached the center of the square, where Nolan and a group of farmers had set up a defensive position behind an overturned truck. They were taking heavy fire, pinned down by a sniper in a building across the street. Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the building, ducking behind a wall. There was a gap in the sniper's line of sight, just enough for Jack to make his move. He dropped to the ground, rolled, and then came up behind the building. He'd memorized the layout. The sniper wouldn't expect him from the back. A suppressed shot rang out. Jack's rifle took the sniper down, his body slumping forward, lifeless. The fire from the east stopped for a moment as the cartel realized they had lost one of their key players. But the pause didn't last long. The cartel regrouped, flanking the town from both sides. At the final push, 9:45 p.m. Jack had no intention of letting them regroup. He called for a full-on counterattack, rallying the townspeople to push forward, to drive the cartel out. "Keep moving," Jack shouted, leading the charge down Main Street. The townspeople, galvanized by Jack's presence, followed him. The shock of seeing their town under siege turned into something more, something fiercer. Nolan was right behind him, coordinating the counterattack. They had the upper hand now, and Jack knew it wouldn't last long if they didn't take control of the situation fast. The turning point, 10 p.m. Jack's team was closing in. The cartel was down to its last few men, and El Rey knew it. He ordered a retreat, but it was too late. Jack had already set the trap. As the remaining cartel forces tried to pull back to their vehicles, they found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. The townspeople, some of whom had never fired a weapon in their lives, fought with a desperation Jack had never seen before. The final wave of cartel soldiers was decimated in a matter of minutes. El Rey's men didn't stand a chance against the sheer force of unity the town had found. By 10:30 p.m., it was over. The cartel was in disarray, their forces shattered. And the town had survived. Aftermath, 11:10 p.m. The smoke still hung in the air, the sounds of gunfire fading away. The town was a battlefield. Windows shattered, cars overturned, blood on the streets. Jack stood in the middle of Main Street, breathing hard, his rifle hanging by his side. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a faint light over the wreckage. Nolan came up beside him, looking around at the damage. "We did it," Nolan said quietly. Jack nodded. "We did." But as the sun rose over Dry Creek, Jack knew this was just the beginning. The cartel had been pushed back, but the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after the battle felt like a strange dream. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the wreckage of Dry Creek. The streets were littered with debris, broken glass, burned-out vehicles, and bodies. The air smelled like smoke and gunpowder, and the silence felt more haunting than the gunfire had. Jack stood in the center of Main Street, staring down at the ground, his boots crunching over glass. His fingers twitched near his sidearm, but there was no immediate danger. "Not yet, Jack?" Nolan's voice broke the stillness. The sheriff stepped up, his face worn and tired, but there was something in his eyes, something Jack recognized. "You think they're gone?" Nolan asked quietly. Jack didn't respond at first. His mind was elsewhere, back on the battlefield, replaying every moment, every shot fired, every life lost. This town had bled, and it had bled because of him. "No," Jack said finally. "They're not gone. Not by a long shot." Nolan nodded, his expression grim. "El Rey won't let this slide. You know that, right?" Jack met his gaze, his eyes cold and unyielding. "I don't just know it. I expect it." The price of survival by noon, word had spread. The townspeople began to gather again, their faces a mix of disbelief and wariness. Some were mourning the dead, while others were already planning their next steps. Jack didn't allow himself to relax. He kept moving, walking from person to person, making sure everyone was accounted for. He checked the defenses, assessed the damage, and made a mental note of what still needed to be done. But in the back of his mind, there was a nagging thought. El Rey wasn't done. And when El Rey came back, there would be a price to pay. A debt. That would need to be settled. A cold message. That afternoon, Jack received a call on his satellite phone. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end wasn't. "Jack Collins," El Rey's voice was calm, almost mocking. "I hope you enjoyed your little victory, because it's the last one you'll ever have." Jack's jaw tightened. He could almost hear the smile in El Rey's voice. "I'm coming for you, Collins. But it won't be just you. I take down this time," El Rey continued. "I know you have a family, a son, a mother. They're all fair game now. You'll pay for every cartel member you killed last night." Jack's heart stopped for a moment. His grip on the phone tightened so hard that his fingers turned white. "You leave them out of this," Jack spat, his voice low but laced with venom. El Rey laughed on the other end. "You think you can protect them? I'll be there soon enough. To prove you wrong, you have until midnight." The line went dead. The decision Jack stood in the middle of Main Street, his mind racing. El Rey wasn't just coming for him anymore. He was coming for everything Jack had left. His family, his people, his town. And that couldn't stand. He needed a plan. Fast. He walked over to the group of townspeople who had gathered near the eye. Sheriff's office, Marlene, Nolan, a few of the ranchers. They were all watching him, waiting for his lead. But Jack didn't have answers for them. Not yet. "We have a serious problem," Jack said quietly, looking at each of them. "El Rey is coming back tonight, and he's bringing hell with him." "What do we do?" Marlene asked, her voice trembling but determined. "We can't just sit here and wait." "No," Jack said firmly. "We won't wait. We'll hit him first. We'll take the fight to him." The crowd murmured in agreement, but Jack could see the doubt in their eyes. He knew it. These weren't soldiers. They were farmers, shopkeepers, ordinary people caught in something far beyond their control. "I know this isn't what you signed up for," Jack continued, his voice softer now. "But I'm not asking you to fight for me. I'm asking you to fight for yourselves, for your families, for everything you've built here." He paused, taking in their faces. "If we want to survive, we have to strike first. El Rey wants blood, and I'm going to give him a hell of a lot more than he's expecting." The trap by 9:00 p.m., the plan was set. Jack and Nolan had coordinated the town's defenses, but this time it wasn't about barricades. It wasn't about waiting for the cartel to come to them. This time they were going on the offensive. Jack had a good sense of El Rey's tactics. The cartel would be cocky. They'd come in strong, thinking they could sweep through Dry Creek. They wouldn't expect the ambush Jack had planned. They'd hit the cartel on the south side of the town, where the dirt road met the main highway. It was a narrow passage, perfect for an ambush. Jack's team, along with a handful of volunteers, would set up in the hills, waiting for El Rey's convoy to come into view. Then, when they least expected it, Jack would unleash the full force of the town's makeshift army. The confrontation midnight came. The town lay in wait, like a coiled spring, ready to snap. Jack stood with Nolan in the front line, watching the sea, road. The minutes dragged on, the silence almost unbearable. Then the sound of engines broke the stillness. A dozen vehicles, just like before, SUVs, trucks and motorcycles, all moving fast, their headlights cutting through the night. Jack's heart beat faster as he checked his rifle one last time. "Get ready," he whispered. The first vehicle came into view, and Jack didn't hesitate. He gave the signal. The gunfire erupted like thunder, deafening in the night. The cartel. Convoy was caught off guard, chaos erupting as they scrambled for cover. The sounds of gunshots and shouting filled the air, but Jack and his people didn't stop. They poured everything they had into the ambush. It was a bloody, brutal fight. El Rey's men fought back with everything they had, but they were disorganized. Confused. They didn't expect to be blindsided like this. The moment of reckoning amidst the chaos, Jack saw him. El Rey. He was crouched behind one of the trucks, his face twisted in rage. Jack's eyes locked onto him, and for a moment everything else faded. The fight, the gunfire, the explosions, none of it mattered. It was just him and El Rey. Jack's fingers tightened around the trigger, but before he could pull it, something stopped him. A voice he'd hoped he'd never hear. "Dad!" It was Luke. Jack turned just in time to see his son running toward him, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad, no. Don't!" Jack's breath caught in his throat. His eyes locked onto his. Son Luke, who was running toward him, fear evident in his every step. Time slowed for a moment. Everything around Jack seemed to blur except for Luke, who had no idea what was happening, no idea that his father was about to make the hardest choice of his life. The gunfire still raged around them, but Jack couldn't focus on that. His fingers were still hovering over the trigger. El Rey just a few yards away, vulnerable, so close to the end. But the look in Luke's eyes stopped him. "Dad, no!" Luke yelled, his voice cracking as he reached Jack's side. His small frame was trembling with fear, but he was standing tall. "Please, don't do it." Jack's mind raced. El Rey had destroyed everything he'd ever loved. He had killed, tortured, and nearly torn this town apart. For revenge, for power, for nothing but greed. And now El Rey was right in front of him. Jack's chance to end it once and for all. But Luke's voice echoed in his mind. What kind of father would I be if I chose revenge over my son? "Jack, you can't do this," Luke said again, his hands shaking as he gripped Jack's arm. "This won't bring anyone back. It won't fix anything. It's not worth it." Jack looked down at his son, at the boy who had seen too much already, the boy who had almost lost everything. Jack had promised himself he wouldn't let this life swallow his son whole. He'd lived through it, but he couldn't let Luke do the same. The fury that had burned in Jack's chest just moments before began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't just about El Rey, it was about the future, Luke's future. Jack lowered his weapon. "Get down!" he shouted to Nolan, who was coordinating the attack with the other townspeople. Nolan nodded, signaling for the fire to stop. The gunfire slowed as Jack took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving El Rey. For a moment, two men locked eyes. There was no fear in El Rey's gaze, only contempt. Jack took another step closer this time, his heart hammered in his chest, but the anger, the thirst for vengeance, seemed to leave him, evaporating in the cold night air. "You're not going to win this, Jack," El Rey spat, his voice bitter. "You can't stop me, I've already won." Jack's jaw clenched. "You're wrong," he said softly but firmly. "The war is over, and you're done." He reached down and pulled the cuffs from his belt. Without a word, he snapped them. Around El Rey's wrists, the sound of metal clinking, ringing louder than the gunshots that had filled the air. The cartel leader, once so powerful, slumped in defeat. He was now just another man caught in the crossfire of a war that was far from over, but he wouldn't get the satisfaction of taking another life. "Take him," Jack ordered, motioning toward Nolan and the others. "Lock him up. We're not letting him get away this time." As El-Rey was dragged away, Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but there was no sense of victory. It wasn't about that anymore. He had done what needed to be done, not for glory, not for revenge, but for the future of his son and his town. The aftermath by dawn, the town was quiet again. The remnants of the battle were scattered across Dry Creek, the fire still smoldering in some of the wreckage. The sounds of the night had faded, leaving only the sound of distant birds calling out as the sun slowly crept over the horizon. Jack stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, staring out at the destruction. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally. His body ached, his mind numbed by the weight of everything he had just been through, but in his chest he felt something else, a faint sense of relief. It wasn't victory, it wasn't closure, but it was something he hadn't had in a long time, peace. Behind him, Luke came out, his expression tentative but curious. Jack turned to face him, his eyes softening. "You okay?" Jack asked, crouching. Down to Luke's level. Luke nodded, though his face was still pale. "Yeah, I guess." Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, son, you didn't deserve any of this." "I'm just glad you're here," Luke said quietly, his voice shaky. "I was scared. I thought you were going to... You know..." Jack's heart twisted, guilt flooding him. How could I have even considered it? "I know," Jack whispered, placing a hand on Luke's shoulder. "I'm sorry. I'll never let that happen again." But deep down, Jack knew there was a part of him that would always be in that place, ready to fight, ready to protect. It was who he was. But for the first time in a long time, he understood the real cost of that life. A new kind of war later. That day, El-Rey was hauled off to the authorities in the nearby city. Jack made sure that this time the cartel leader would face justice in the proper way. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing was ever easy. But it was the right thing to do. The town would rebuild. The damage was done, but Dry Creek had held its ground. The people were stronger for it, and they were beginning to see that their survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about coming together as a community, as a family. But there was no illusion that the war was truly over. El-Rey had been captured, but there were others still out there waiting for their chance to strike. The cartel might have lost a battle, but the war was far from won. Jack knew that. The road ahead would be long and dangerous, but now he had something more to fight for. The final decision, as the sun set once again over Dry Creek, Jack found himself standing at the same spot where the battle had begun. The scars of the war were still fresh, but there was something new in the air, a sense of resolve. Jack looked down at Luke, who was playing with a stick near the riverbank, his back to him. For the first time in a long time, Jack allowed himself to smile. Maybe, just maybe, this town had a chance. But Jack also knew that the hardest decisions were still ahead. There would be other battles, other enemies, but this time he wouldn't face them alone. This time, the war wouldn't just be his, and that was the way it had to be. The days after El-Rey's capture were filled with quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a place after a storm has passed, but not after the danger has completely gone. There was still work to be done, repairs to be made, families to care for, and wounds to heal. But despite the stillness, an undercurrent of unease hung in the air. Jack could feel it, like a shadow lurking just beyond the town's horizon. It wasn't just about rebuilding the town. It wasn't just about making sure El-Rey stayed locked away. It was about what came next. What did Dry Creek become after all this? What was it supposed to be now? The first step, Jack stood in front of the sheriff's office, watching as the volunteers worked tirelessly to rebuild the barricades, clear the rubble, and sweep through the town. The faces of the people were weary, their eyes showing the exhaustion of the past few days. But there was something else in those eyes, too, a quiet sense of resolve. He stepped down the steps and moved toward Nolan, who was talking to a few of the ranchers near the gates. Nolan had been more than just a sheriff during the last battle. He'd been a leader. helping coordinate the defense when it had seemed like all hope was lost. "Things look better than I thought," Nolan said, giving Jack a tired but approving look. Jack nodded but didn't smile. "Yeah, but we're not done yet." Nolan met his gaze, and for a moment the two men exchanged an unspoken understanding. "You're right," Nolan replied, his voice serious. "The town's holding on, but there's still a lot of rebuilding to do, physically and emotionally. I know people are shaken, but we can't afford to rest for long." Jack let out a sigh. "I'm not resting, but we also can't keep waiting for the next wave. We need to figure out how to move forward. How do we protect this town long term? How do we keep what happened from happening again?" Nolan looked down, thinking for a moment. Then he raised his head. "You might have to let go, Jack." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you can't keep carrying this town alone. There's a reason it survived this long, and it wasn't just because of you, it's because of all of us," Jack wanted to argue. He wanted to say that there was no time for that, no time to let go. But deep down, he knew Nolan was right. Jack had spent so much of his life in survival mode, and now it was time to make the hard choice, to let the town heal, to let the people find their own way. Jack nodded slowly, finally accepting the weight of those words. "I know. I'll work on it." The arrival of new blood. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, a convoy of vehicles rumbled into town. Jack's heart skipped a beat when he saw them, a mix of well-armored trucks, military-style SUVs and motorcycles, all emblazoned with the insignia of a private security company, mercenaries. Jack tensed. They were all too familiar, too close to the world he had tried so hard to escape, but these were different. They didn't come with the purpose of pillaging or stealing. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with military tattoos running down his neck, stepped out of the first vehicle and strode toward Jack. "You're Jack Collins?" the man asked, his voice gravelly. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" The man didn't flinch. "We've been hired to help with security. You've got a situation here, and we've been sent in to make sure it doesn't get worse." Jack studied the man carefully. There was something about him that didn't sit right, something calculated in his stance, the way he carried himself. Jack could see the scars beneath the man's sleeves, evidence of a long career in violence. "I don't know who hired you, but I'm not looking for more guns," Jack said firmly. The mercenary smiled grimly. "You've got a town full of people who need protecting. And there are more coming, cartels, maybe even some of El Rey's people looking for payback. We're here to make sure you don't have to fight alone." Jack didn't trust him, but the man had a point. The town was still vulnerable. It would only take one organized attack to turn everything they had fought for into dust. "Who's the boss?" Jack asked, his tone cold. "Name's Graves," the mercenary replied. "I'm in charge of this crew, and I'm here to make sure Dry Creek doesn't fall. You want help or not?" Jack paused, weighing the options. He could continue trying to defend the town with what little he had left, or he could accept the help, even if it came with a price. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was one he couldn't ignore. "Fine," Jack said, his voice steely. "But you're under my command while you're here, understand?" Graves chuckled, a dry laugh that sent chills down Jack's spine. "Understood." The dark cloud as the mercenaries set up camp on the outskirts of town, Jack couldn't shake. The feeling that something was off. He had dealt with enough mercenaries and contractors in his time to know how dangerous they could be. Some were loyal to the end, others not so much. "Dad, who are they?" Luke asked later that night as they sat together on the porch, looking out over the town. The quiet had returned, but it felt unsettled, like the calm before another storm. "They're here to help," Jack replied, though his tone wasn't as confident as it had been. "But I don't know if they can be trusted." Luke, ever the perceptive child, studied his father's face. "Are you going to let them stay?" Jack took a deep breath and glanced at the horizon. The mercenaries were still setting up their perimeter, and the sound of distant engines hummed through the air. "I don't know," Jack admitted. "But right now I don't have many choices." Luke didn't reply, but Jack could feel the weight of his son's gaze. He had hoped to shield him from this world of violence and uncertainty, but it seemed like that was no longer possible. The darkness was coming for them, and there was no way to avoid it. The new reality: by morning, the mercenaries were fully integrated into the town's defenses. Graves had set up a command center in the old church where he and his team began running tactical drills. They had sophisticated equipment, heavy weaponry, and the kind of training that made Jack uneasy. But even with all their resources, Jack knew one thing: they couldn't hold off the inevitable forever. The world outside was watching, and the cartel wouldn't be the only ones to take notice of Dry Creek. The question that lingered in Jack's mind was, what would this town become with these mercenaries here? Would they truly help, or would they turn Dry Creek into a prize to be claimed, a resource to exploit? Jack couldn't afford to let his guard down, not with new blood in town, and especially not with the dangers that were still lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next move. The desert wind howled through Dry Creek like a ghost from another life. It carried dust, heat, and something else, something Jack couldn't quite name. He stood outside the church-turned command center, watching Graves's men run drills like clockwork. Everything was efficient, cold, impersonal, exactly how Jack remembered it. It had been years since he'd worn the patch, since he'd followed orders from men like Graves. But now standing there, watching the precision and aggression in every move, it all came flooding back. The Delta days, the Black Ops missions, the decisions that had cost lives, and one mission in particular. Jack Collins, haven't seen you since Rio San Pablo. The voice struck like a gunshot. Jack turned slowly and his eyes narrowed. A tall, lean man stepped into the light, peeling off a pair of tactical gloves. His face was aged by sun and war. But Jack knew that jawline, that scar under his eye. The tattoo just visible beneath his collar. "Derek Maddox," Jack said evenly. "Didn't expect to see you crawling out of the shadows." Maddox grinned. "Didn't expect to see you babysitting a farm town." Jack didn't smile. "I left that life behind." Maddox's eyes glittered. "So you keep telling yourself. History resurrected." Later that night, Jack sat alone at the bar in Marlene's cafe, staring into a half-empty glass of bourbon. The low hum of conversation behind him barely registered. His mind was miles away, in the jungle of South America, in the collapsing villages of Afghanistan, in the missions no one was supposed to survive. Maddox's reappearance wasn't coincidence. Graves had brought him in on purpose, to provoke Jack, or worse, to test him. "What happened in Rio San Pablo?" Nolan's voice cut into the silence. Jack didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip, then set the glass down. "It was a black mission, off the books. We were sent in to remove a warlord suspected of trafficking and biological weapons. But intel was garbage. The village was full of civilians." He paused, his voice dropped lower. "We were given the green light anyway. Orders came from the top. Maddox followed them to the letter. I didn't." Nolan leaned on the bar. "So what happened?" "I pulled my team. Refused to light up the target without confirmation. Maddox took his squad in solo. Ended up wiping the whole village. No weapons. Just people." Nolan went still. "And they covered it up?" Jack nodded. "Filed it as a successful operation. Maddox got a medal. I got honorable discharge papers and a quiet warning to disappear." Nolan exhaled, rubbing his face. "And now he's here, in your town." Jack's voice was quiet but firm. "Yeah, and I don't believe in coincidences." Lines in the sand over the next few days. Tension grew like dry brush ready to ignite. Graves and his team took over security with military efficiency. They installed motion sensors, night vision drones, and set up tactical checkpoints around Dry Creek. And the townspeople hated it. "They're turning this place into a war zone," Marlene snapped, slamming down a coffee pot. "We fought to survive, not to live under martial law." "They're here to protect us," Jack replied, though even he didn't sound convinced anymore. "Then why does it feel like they're waiting for something to happen?" she shot back. Jack didn't answer, because deep down, he was asking himself the same question. An unwelcome revelation. One night, while checking the southern perimeter, Jack caught Maddox alone by the water tower. He approached without a sound. "You following me now?" Maddox said, without turning around. Jack stopped a few feet behind. "Him. Why are you really here?" Maddox chuckled. "Told you. Security detail. You've got a price on your head, Jack. El Rey might be in chains, but his network isn't. Word is someone's been paid a lot to put you in the ground. Jack stared at him. So what? Graves took the contract? Maddox turned, his smile gone. Graves didn't take the contract. He sold it. He tipped off the people who were coming. Thought maybe he could control both ends. Make some cash, keep the town secure, and play kingmaker when it's all over. Jack's blood went cold. And you went along with it? I came to warn you, Maddox said, voice lower now. Believe it or not, I still remember Rio San Pablo. I was wrong then, you were right. Jack didn't know whether to believe him. He didn't have time to decide, because just then the first explosion rocked the northern gate. All hell breaks loose. Again, alarms blared through Dry Creek as black SUVs tore down the dirt roads. Cartel reinforcements, armed to the teeth. Graves. Men scrambled into position, but some of them turned their guns inward, traitors in the ranks. Jack and Maddox dove for cover as bullets sprayed across the open ground. Nolan's voice came over the radio, panicked but composed. We've got shooters inside the perimeter. Repeat, Graves's men are compromised. Jack looked at Maddox. You coming with me? Maddox nodded once. Let's clean this up. They moved like old times, clearing rooms, checking corners, covering each other's blind spots. Jack didn't trust Maddox, but the battlefield was their shared language, and in that chaos, their history made sense. Together, they fought back the infiltrators, defending the town building by building. Jack's old instincts came roaring back, not as a soldier but as a guardian. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Dry Creek was under fire again, but this time, the danger wasn't just from the outside. It was coming from within. Jack moved through the chaos like a shadow, adrenaline burning through his veins. Every instinct honed from years on the battlefield kicking in. Betrayal. That's what this was. Graves had sold them out, and now his mercs, at least half of them, were working with cartel reinforcements to wipe Dry Creek off the map, and Jack was done holding back. The battle plan, Jack, Nolan, and Maddox regrouped inside the old hardware store, the safest spot they could find that wasn't already crawling with enemies. Jack flipped over a dusty table, cleared it, and drew a rough layout of the town with chalk and broken screws. They're coming from 3 angles, north, west, and through the canyon, Jack said, tapping the table. They're pushing us toward the center. Nolan was bandaging a cut above his eye. They want us cornered. They want the town, Maddox added. Not just you. This place has something they need. Roots, real estate, cover from the feds. El Rey's people still want to turn this into a pipeline for moving product. Jack clenched his jaw. Then we make it useless to them, he pointed. To a few key structures. The radio tower, the supply truck yard, and the water tower. They take those, we lose communication, resources, and access. But if we blow them ourselves, cut off the routes before they can hold them, we make the town too expensive to keep. Nolan blinked. You want to burn our own home to the ground? Jack met his eyes. Only long enough to save it. The resistance rises word spread fast. Jack and Nolan gathered every able-bodied local, ranchers, mechanics, bartenders, teens with hunting rifles. They didn't have much, but what they had they knew how to use. Jack stood on the back of Nolan's pickup, overlooking the group gathered in the dusty lot behind the post office. Most of you know me, some of you don't, but what you need to know is this. We're not waiting for rescue. There is no cavalry. We are the line. We hold or we lose everything. His voice dropped, sharp and steady. They think this is a town they can take. Let's show them it's a town that fights. Back, shouts, cheers, fear under the surface but fire in their eyes. Maddox looked over from the side. Not bad, Commander. Jack gave him a side glance. Just like old times. The first wave night fell hard. Dry Creek had always been quiet under the stars, but now the silence felt like a trap. Then came the engines, lights, distant yelling, in Spanish and broken English. The siege had begun. The mercenary cartel alliance moved in with tactical precision, drones buzzing overhead, laser sights dancing through the dust. But what they didn't count on was just how ready the people of Dry Creek were. Homemade traps rigged with tripwires and bear traps went off at the north gate. Nolan and a group of farmers held the west side with bolt-action rifles, ducking behind hay bales and tractor equipment. And Jack? Jack and Maddox flanked from the canyon, hitting the enemy from behind with surgical strikes, just like the old days. The smell of gunpowder, sweat, and sand filled the air. Screams, explosions. The town lit up in flashes of fire and chaos. It was war. Again. But this time, Jack wasn't a lone soldier. This time, he was fighting for a future. Graves's gambit. Jack caught sight of Graves near the church, directing the remaining loyal mercs, those who hadn't turned. But something was wrong. Then he saw it. A drone, larger than the others, circling above the water tower. It wasn't recon, it was carrying a payload. Jack's blood went cold. "He's gonna blow the tower, take us all out," Maddox cursed. "Graves has gone rogue." Jack ran. He didn't shout, didn't hesitate, just sprinted through the back alleys, bullets snapping past his head as the drone hovered lower. He climbed the scaffolding with the speed of a man half his age. The drone locked on. 3 seconds. Jack drew his sidearm, aimed and fired. 2 shots. Center mass. The drone dropped like a stone, landing 20 feet from the base with a dull metallic thud. Jack exhaled, then heard the click of a pistol behind him. "Graves, I told you, Collins," he said. "You were always too soft." Jack didn't flinch. "And you were always too damn greedy." Graves raised the gun, and a shot rang out. But it wasn't from Graves. It was from behind him, Luke. The kid was standing at the base of the tower, Jack's old revolver in his hands, shaking, but steady. Graves collapsed, eyes wide in shock. Jack climbed down slowly, heart pounding. He knelt in front of Luke. The boy was trembling. I had to." Jack didn't say anything at first. He pulled his son into a hug, holding him tight. "You did what you had to," Jack whispered. "Just like your old man." Victory at a price. By morning, the gunfire had stopped. The cartel forces, scattered and leaderless, retreated into the hills. The few remaining loyal mercenaries surrendered. The people of Dry Creek stood bloodied, bruised but standing. They had held the line, but not without loss. Homes were destroyed, families mourned, and the town had changed forever. Jack walked through the wreckage as the sun rose, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Maddox joined him, limping slightly. "You still think you can retire in peace?" Maddox asked. Jack gave a tired smile. "Don't know, but I think this place earned it." Maddox nodded, then handed Jack a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" "Intel. Something bigger's coming. Cartels are just a piece of it." Jack looked at him. "You staying?" Maddox shrugged. "Depends. You still got room for an old war dog?" Jack looked at Luke helping rebuild the fence with Nolan. Then back at Maddox. "We'll see." The sun rose blood-red over Dry Creek. Ash and dust still hung in the air from the night's siege. The town left looking like a ghost of itself. People moved like survivors, bruised but alive, hardened by what they'd been forced to endure. Jack stood on the edge of his land, looking out at the miles of cracked earth beyond. The silence wasn't peace. It was a pause, and he could feel it in his bones. This war wasn't over, not even close. Something bigger, the paper Maddox had handed him the day before, was still folded tight in his pocket. Jack hadn't looked at it yet. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe some part of him knew that once he opened that door there'd be no closing it. But Dry Creek didn't need a break. It needed answers. And Jack needed to be the one to find them. He opened the paper. Satellite codes, routes, timetables, names. It was a web of information that pointed not just to cartel activity, but to something higher. Government contracts, corporate interests, and secret shipments moving across borders under the radar. Jack muttered under his breath, "This isn't about drugs, it never was." Maddox appeared beside him, sipping stale coffee out of a chipped mug. "You get it now?" he said. Jack didn't respond. "Cartels are middlemen," Maddox continued. "Pawns. The real players wear suits, sit in D.C., and make a killing off chaos. Someone's building a corridor from Mexico to the Rockies, and Dry Creek is smack in the middle." Jack let that sink in. "So what? They're trying to turn this town into a hub," Maddox nodded. "Not just that. A testing ground. For logistics, for militia response, maybe even for drone surveillance. Whatever this is, it's bigger than Ray, bigger than the cartel. Jack's knuckles tightened around the edge of the porch railing. And Graves. Graves was in deep, too deep. He sold you out thinking he could control the outcome. He was just another tool. Jack shook his head slowly. Then it's time we start breaking the machine. Tensions in town at the town. Hall, what was left of it, Nolan had called a meeting. Everyone was still rattled, some had lost family, others were demanding answers. "You brought them here," one man shouted at Jack. "Those mercs came because of you." Jack stood calm even as the crowd grew louder. "They didn't come because of me," Jack said, voice firm. "They came because this town is more valuable than you know." And they were just the first wave. Marlene stepped up beside him. "So what do we do, Jack? We just wait for the next raid?" "No," Jack said. "We prepare. We fight smarter. And we take the fight to them, on our terms." He walked over to the map pinned to the back wall, marked it with red dots, locations from Maddox's intel. "There's a trail that leads out of here, south into Arizona. There's a facility, a ghost site. Maddox says it's where shipments are routed. If we hit that, we send a message, the eye." Room went still. Luke, who had been standing quietly near the door, finally spoke. "You said this place is worth protecting, so let's protect it." "All the way." Jack looked at his son, pride mixing with worry. The boy had changed. They all had ghost sight. 2 nights later, under a moonless sky, Jack, Maddox, and a small group of volunteers crossed the state line into Arizona, moving silently through the canyons. What they found at the edge of the desert wasn't just a hideout. It was a compound. Barbed wire, patrol drones, solar towers, and high-tech sensors, all in the middle of nowhere. On the outside, it looked like a decommissioned power station, but Jack recognized military design when he saw it. They watched for hours, identifying guard rotations, scanning for weak points, and then Jack saw a logo on one of the black trucks pulling in. Kestrel Industries. His stomach dropped. Kestrel was a private defense contractor, one he'd worked with, one he'd seen do unspeakable things overseas. Jack turned to Maddox. "They're funding this." Maddox nodded grimly. "They're not just funding it. They're running it." The infiltration that night, they breached the compound using underground drainage tunnels Jack had spotted earlier. It was surgical, quiet, just like Jack used to do back in Delta. Maddox flanked left, Jack took right. They moved through the interior, past sealed doors, computer banks, crates labeled in code. Jack opened one crate, MREs, ammo, field meds, all. Marked for US military use. Another door, locked. Jack planted a charge, low yield. Boom, in and out. Inside were screens showing real-time maps of Dry Creek, satellite footage, biometrics. They were tracking the whole town. Maddox let out a low whistle. "This ain't just data collection." Jack snapped photos with his burner phone. "This is targeting." Suddenly, alarms. A motion sensor must have tripped. Red lights flared. Voices shouted. Footsteps pounded. "Time to go," Jack growled. They barely made it out. Maddox got grazed in the leg. Jack covered their retreat with a smoke grenade and a lucky shot that dropped a drone mid-air. They melted back into the desert, silent and furious. The truth comes home back in Dry Creek. Jack gathered the town's leaders and laid it all out. "This isn't a cartel problem anymore. This is a corporate occupation. We're a test run, and if we don't stop them now, they'll steamroll everything." He dropped a printed Kestrel logo onto the table. "This is who we're up against now." The room went quiet, and then Nolan said, "Then we take the fight straight to them." Dry Creek was done waiting. Jack stood at the center of the town square, sun beating down on him, red dust swirling at his boots. Around him were farmers, ranchers, veterans, and even a few teenagers too stubborn to back down. He looked at each of them, not as civilians, but as soldiers. Because ready or not, that's what they were now. "This isn't just about our town anymore," Jack said, voice steady. "It's about every other town like it. Forgotten, used, trampled on. We strike now, or we give them everything." Nods, gritted teeth, silent agreement. It was time to go to war. The compound in Arizona was their target, the beating heart of the Kestrel operation. If they could hit it, take it offline, expose the files inside, they might have a shot at ending this before it spread. Maddox, still limping but game as ever, laid it out on the table. We've got 4 vehicles, 1 drone we rebuilt from scrap, and enough C4 to make them sweat. Nolan's team creates a distraction at the north gate. Jack's team punches through the south fence. We plant charges inside and blow their server hub. Jack pointed at a red circle on the map. That's our exit route. Once the charges go off, we're ghosts. Marlene raised an eyebrow. And if we don't make it out? Jack just looked at her. Then we make it count. The night before, Jack sat on his porch watching the stars. Luke came up beside him, quiet. You ever scared? The boy asked. Jack chuckled softly. Every damn time. Luke sat down. But you still go. Yeah? Jack said. Because I've seen what happens when you don't. He looked at his son, really looked at him. The kid had grown in weeks, hardened, but there was still softness there. Still good. You don't have to go tomorrow, Jack said. No shame in staying back. Luke didn't even blink. You taught me how to fight. I'm not letting you go alone. Jack didn't argue. The assault begins midnight. The 4 trucks rolled out under a new moon, engines muffled, lights blacked out. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the compound glowing faintly in the distance. Jack checked his gear. Sidearm, M4, 2 flashbangs, 4 charges. Nolan's voice came over the radio. In position. Ready when you are. Jack looked. At his team, Maddox, Luke, 2 farmers who'd been in the Marines. He gave a single nod. Send it. A moment later, boom, the north gate exploded in a fireball of smoke and light. Guards rushed to contain the breach. Lights flared. Sirens howled, but they never saw the southern fence being cut, never saw Jack's team slip through the shadows. Inside the compound, it was chaos. Jack moved fast, neutralizing 2 guards silently with a blade, signaling his team. Forward, Maddox disabled the camera grid. Luke kept watch with eyes sharp as a hawk. Then they reached the server room, steel door, reinforced. Maddox slapped on a charge. 30 seconds, they backed up. Jack stared at the blinking red light. Boom. Steel, twisted like paper. Inside were racks of servers, each one humming with secrets. Maddox plugged in a drive, downloading everything. Jack planted the explosives. Then came the gunfire. Hell unleashed. They were surrounded. Guards stormed in. Kestrel operatives, not just hired muscle. These were the real thing. Jack and his team held the line, bullets tearing through steel and sparks flying overhead. Luke fired his first real shot in combat and dropped a target with shaking hands. Jack was beside him in an instant. You okay? Luke nodded, breathing hard. I'm with you. Good, Jack said. Now move. They fought their way out, weaving through corridors as fire bloomed behind them. One of the farmers took a round to the shoulder but kept going. Maddox laid suppressive fire while Jack planted the final charge at the mainframe's power supply. Time to go, Maddox yelled. As they made it outside, Nolan's truck screeched to a halt by the south. Fence, get in! They jumped into the back, and just as they sped off, boom! The compound erupted in flame and smoke, the sky lighting up like a 4th of July nightmare. The entire hillside glowed red. Jack turned back, watching it burn, and he felt something shift. The fallout back in Dry Creek, the team was met with cheers and tears. They'd made it. Barely. But now they had proof. Maddox's drive was full of files, transcripts, satellite data, payment logs linking Kestrel Industries to cartel operations, mercenary contracts, and more. Enough to blow the lid off the entire network. But exposure meant something else too. They were targets now. Jack sat alone with the drive in his hand, knowing full well the storm it would bring. But he also knew one thing. They started this war on Jack's doorstep. Now he was taking it to theirs. The sun was just beginning to set over Dry Creek, but the air already felt thick with the weight of what was coming. Jack stood at the edge of the land he had fought so hard to protect, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. Somewhere out there, the storm was already gathering. The raid on the Kestrel compound had rattled the hornet's nest. Jack knew that. He knew retaliation was inevitable. And worse, the attack had stirred more than just cartel goons. Kestrel Industries had resources, connections that extended into the very heart of the government, into powerful corporate networks, with the kind of influence that could reach across borders. But they had also made a mistake. The town had fought back, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a sliver of hope flicker within him, hope that maybe they could win this. But for now, the battle was about survival. Rising tensions, the next morning everything seemed wrong. The usual hum of Dry Creek, the chirping of birds, the occasional chatter of locals at the general store, was gone. The tension in the air was suffocating. Jack had a plan to send the files to the authorities, but Maddox stopped him before he could make a move. "Not yet," Maddox warned, his face grim. "We need to be smarter. They'll have eyes everywhere now. You expose this too soon, you'll be painted as a terrorist." Jack's jaw tightened. "Then what do we do?" "We hold off, we get more, we hit them where it hurts." Jack didn't like it, but he understood. Kestrel wasn't just some criminal enterprise. They were a machine. And machines didn't fall easily. If they were going to tear it down, they needed more than just one lucky strike. The calm before the storm, it didn't take long for the storm to hit. That evening, as Jack and his team gathered for a strategy session, the power flickered. Then, the lights went out entirely. Jack's instincts kicked in. He moved quickly, grabbing his gear, heading out onto the porch to survey the street. It wasn't just the power. There was a sound in the distance, something low and ominous. A deep rumble, the thud of helicopters. Blackhawks. They were coming, under attack. Before Jack could process the full scale of what was happening, the first round of artillery struck. The ground shook beneath their feet, and windows shattered as blasts ripped through Dry Creek streets. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. The attack was swift, brutal, and it wasn't just the military. This was Kestrel's full force. Mercenaries, contractors, and who knew what else. "Stay low, stay inside," Jack shouted to his team. Maddox rushed to the front, already rallying a handful of volunteers who had once been civilians, now warriors in the making. Jack moved toward the center of the town, toward the fire trucks, toward the last line of defense. But they were too well prepared. The attack wasn't just on the ground. Drones started raining down from the sky, precision strikes, controlled, explosions that targeted the heart of Dry Creek's infrastructure. "They want to burn us out," Jack muttered to himself, but there was no panic in his voice, only the calm of a man who had been through far worse and who wasn't about to give in. The battle for survival fighting back was chaotic. Jack and his team deployed traps and guerrilla tactics, using the terrain and the elements to their advantage. Explosions rang out as they took down the drones, and Maddox's team set up barricades in key areas of town. For a while, it felt like a war of attrition. Every corner they turned, every alley they held, felt like a battle fought with the weight of the world on their shoulders. And still, the Kestrel mercenaries pushed forward, coming down from the hills, their black-clad figures a relentless wave of force. "Jack!" Nolan's voice came over the radio, urgent. "We've got eyes on their main command center. If we hit them now—" "I know." Jack didn't hesitate. "We hit them. But we need a diversion." Luke appeared at his side, face set like stone. "What do you need me to do?" Jack didn't hesitate. "Take out their comms, disrupt their signal. We need them blind for a minute." Luke nodded, determination flooding his features. A last-ditch effort as the town was engulfed in flames. Jack and his team mounted a desperate counterattack. The remaining volunteers were fighting tooth and nail, setting traps, cutting down mercenaries where they could. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy. But they were pushing them back. And then, just as things seemed at their darkest, just as the sounds of war roared in their ears, a message came through on Jack's encrypted phone, Maddox's backup. Maddox had arranged it with one of the few trusted sources Jack still had, a former ally in Washington who had connections in high places. The moment they struck, the world would know. But first, they needed to get out of the crossfire. Jack looked to the horizon. The next wave of helicopters was approaching, and this time they wouldn't have enough manpower to stop them. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't need to. The escape Jack gathered his team together, eyes scanning the chaos around him. Luke and Maddox were ready. The civilians were holding their ground, but the fight was slipping. He had to make a choice. "Get to the underground. I'll hold them off," Jack ordered. Maddox hesitated but then nodded. They'd fought together long enough for unspoken trust. As the team made its way toward the hidden tunnel beneath the town, one Jack had prepared for situations like this, he took a final look at Dry Creek. It was burning, but not defeated. The heart of the town was still beating. Jack turned to his son. "We're going to finish this, but we need to get out of here now." The dawn of a new war, they made it underground. The hum of the old tunnel systems echoing in their ears. They'd survive this. But Jack knew one thing for sure. The war wasn't just happening in Dry Creek anymore, it was happening everywhere. Kestrel had made its move. And now so had they. And this time there would be no turning back. The town of Dry Creek was little more than a smoldering shell, a ghost of the place it had been just days before. But amidst the ruins, something else was happening, a rising. The people Jack had fought alongside were no longer just farmers and ranchers. They were soldiers, ready to defend what was theirs, no matter the cost. Jack's eyes scanned the faces of his team, standing around the old conference table beneath. The earth's surface in the makeshift underground bunker he had prepared for just such a day. They were bruised, battered and drained, but they were far from beaten. The files Maddox had secured from the Kestrel compound were spread out on the table, illuminated by the dim lights of the underground shelter. This was the moment they had prepared for. They had the intelligence, the firepower, and now they needed one thing more, a plan, rallying the troops. Jack took a deep breath, letting the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. His town, his people, had already paid the price. Now it was time to ensure their sacrifices meant something. "All right," Jack began, voice steady but carrying the weight of command. "We've got the data. Kestrel's operations go far beyond this county. We hit them here, we hit them everywhere. This war is far from over." Maddox stepped forward, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "We've got allies in the field, some of the mercs who've turned against Kestrel after the raid on Dry Creek. I've been in contact with them. We need to go after their network every link," Jack said. "We cut the head off this snake and the body will die. We have the tech and we know their weak points now, but we can't do this alone." The call for reinforcements. Jack reached for his phone, the only means of communication with the outside world, now that most lines were cut off. There was one person he could still trust, the one ally who had the power to turn the tide in this fight. He dialed the number, waiting as the phone rang. When the voice finally picked up, Jack spoke low, urgent. "It's Jack, we need help. Kestrel's escalating, they've attacked Dry Creek, they've got forces all over the country." There was a pause on the other end of the line before a voice Jack hadn't heard in years came through, gruff and familiar. "You know who to call, I'll get it done." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I need everything, weapons, intel, contacts, resources. Kestrel won't stop. If we don't hit them hard enough, we'll lose everything." "You'll get it," the voice on the other end assured him. "But you better be ready for the storm. They won't back down after this. You're not just fighting a company anymore, Jack. You're fighting a machine." The call ended, leaving Jack with a mixture of hope and foreboding. The groundwork for war as. The days passed, Jack worked tirelessly with his team, planning out every move. They weren't just going to strike Kestrel, they were going to cripple them. Every communication, every contract, every backdoor deal, they would all be exposed. Kestrel had become too confident, too careless in their pursuit of power. Now, it was time to make them pay. Jack's plan was to coordinate multiple strikes across the country, each one designed to target a specific part of Kestrel's operations. From their supply chains to their corporate boardrooms, no stone would be left unturned. But Jack knew the stakes were higher than ever. They had made Kestrel bleed, and now the corporation was coming for them with everything they had. And if Dry Creek was any indication, Kestrel's retaliation would be swift and brutal. A dangerous ally as night fell. A convoy of military-grade trucks rolled into town. They were unlike any vehicles Jack had seen before, armored, menacing, with a clear purpose in mind. The driver pulled up to the underground shelter and outstepped the last person Jack expected to see. General Cooper, a former military officer, with deep ties to Black Ops operations, stood tall in front of Jack, his stern face unshaken by the gravity of the situation. His reputation preceded him, merciless in battle, but respected by those who had fought alongside him. He was also the last person Jack would have expected to come to Dry Creek's aid. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd need help," General Cooper said, his voice deep with a hint of amusement. "But I'm here. We'll finish this." Jack stood firm, sizing the general up. The man had a reputation, no question, but trusting him was a different matter altogether. "You're playing with fire, Jack. Kestrel's no joke," Cooper continued, eyes scanning the town in the distance. "But if you're ready to go all in, I've got the resources to take them down. We'll need every weapon, every ally we can get." Jack met his gaze. "We're already all in, Cooper. What's done is done. But we need to hit them before they hit us again." Preparation for the final strike over. The next few days, Jack's team, along with General Cooper's reinforcements, spent every waking moment preparing. They fortified Dry Creek's remaining defenses, moving weapons, creating strategic hideouts, and setting up surveillance systems. They had become a force to be reckoned with, and Kestrel would soon know it. Maddox worked tirelessly to compile the intelligence they had gathered, creating a map of Kestrel's weak points. Nolan and his crew were busy securing allies who still had a reason to fight back. Everyone had a role and everyone was ready, and Jack, as always, stood at the center of it all, leading the charge, making the hard calls, and doing whatever it took to protect the people he loved. But in the back of his mind, Jack couldn't help but wonder, how much longer could they keep this up? A heavy price. As Jack looked out over the fortified perimeter of Dry Creek, his mind was clouded with questions. He had no doubt they were about to escalate this fight into something much bigger than just the fate of a small town. Kestrel would come for them, he knew that. But the real question was, would they survive the storm they had unleashed? One thing was certain. The world would change after this. And whatever happened next, Jack wasn't going down without a fight. The calm before. The storm had come and gone. Dry Creek, now a fortified bastion, felt like a ticking time bomb. Every creak of the old wood and groan of the reinforced walls seemed to echo the growing tension. Jack stood at the makeshift command center, staring down at the maps and intel, spread out before him. The hour of reckoning was closing in, setting the stage. The plan was set. They had gathered their allies, military contractors, disgruntled former Kestrel employees, and even a few government insiders who had grown tired of the company's unchecked power. The operation would begin in the early hours, while Kestrel's forces were still reeling from the previous strikes. They had the element of surprise, but Jack knew it wouldn't last long. "All right," Jack said, turning to his team. "This is it. We're hitting Kestrel's central operations. We need to break them, hit them hard, and make sure they can't recover. So it's not just about survival anymore. It's about ending this." Maddox stood by his side, nodding. "We've got their supply lines mapped out, but they'll have backup. We can't underestimate them." "Understood," Jack replied, voice firm. "But they've underestimated us." Betrayal in the ranks as the team geared up. Readying their gear and loading up on weapons, a shadow loomed over them. Luke, who had been with them since the beginning, seemed more distant than usual. His brow furrowed as he looked over the intel, and Jack couldn't help but notice the unease in his expression. "Something on your mind?" Jack asked, approaching him. Luke hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I don't know, man. Something feels off. You're asking a lot from these people. Are we really prepared for what's coming?" Jack met his gaze, his expression unchanging. "We don't have a choice. We've been backed into a corner, and you know I don't stop until it's over." Luke nodded, but his unease lingered. "Just be careful. There's more at play here than just a battle. Kestrel isn't the only enemy you've got." Jack's instincts kicked in, but he didn't press the issue. There was too much riding on this mission. The thought of betrayal was like a sharp, icy dagger in his gut, but he couldn't afford distractions. Not now. Breaking through. The team moved out in the dead of night. The roads were empty, save for their convoy of armored vehicles and silent operatives, each one prepared to sacrifice everything for the cause. They made their way to Kestrel's Central Command, a sprawling facility hidden in the mountains. It was an impregnable fortress, or at least it used to be. The whole area had been carefully mapped with escape routes and security measures identified. It was time to put the plan into motion. Target acquired. Nolan's voice came through the comms. "We're in position." "Go," Jack ordered. The assault. What followed was a blur of noise, chaos, and firepower. The night came alive as explosions lit up the sky, signaling the beginning of the assault. The mercenaries took cover, but it didn't matter. They had prepared for this moment for too long. Jack's team stormed the facility, taking out key security. Personnel as they went. They were moving fast, coordinated like a well-oiled machine. The high-tech drones they'd secured for surveillance helped pinpoint Kestrel's remaining strongholds inside the compound. As they breached the inner sanctum of the facility, Jack's heart pounded. There was no turning back now. His team was deep within the lion's den, and every moment brought them closer to their goal. The price of war, the fight, wasn't easy. The Kestrel mercenaries were prepared, and they fought like men possessed, knowing that the end was near. Jack's team took casualties, volunteers, friends, allies. Nolan was injured in the first round of fire, a bullet grazing his shoulder. It didn't stop him from moving, though. No one could afford to slow down. "Keep going," Jack shouted. As they pushed forward, at the heart of the compound, they encountered the Kestrel executives, the masterminds behind it all. The very people who had allowed Dry Creek to burn, who had thought themselves untouchable. "Jack," one of them sneered, standing at the far side of the war room, "you really think you can take down Kestrel? You're nothing but ants. The real power is out of your reach." Jack's voice was calm, his eyes cold. "You've underestimated the people of Dry Creek, and you've underestimated me." With one swift move, Jack ordered his team to breach the final wall of the room, and what they found inside was worse than they expected. There, on the central screen, was a live broadcast of Kestrel's next target, a small town just outside of Dry Creek. They weren't stopping. The stakes had risen higher than Jack had realized. This wasn't just about his town anymore. It was about saving everyone. "The escape pull back," Jack ordered as the situation began to spiral out of control. They'd completed their mission, but Kestrel wasn't about to let them walk out alive. The mercenaries rallied, and in the chaos, Jack's team was forced to retreat under heavy fire. They fought their way to the extraction point, but the compound was collapsing around them. A few more brave souls fell behind as the team sprinted for their lives. "Go! Go!" Jack shouted as they reached the choppers waiting for them. The air was thick with smoke, the flames reflecting in their eyes. As they climbed aboard, Jack couldn't help but glance back at the compound. It was burning. Kestrel's fortress was in ruins. But Jack knew the fight wasn't over. Far from it. Kestrel had underestimated his will to protect the people he loved. And now it would cost them everything. The aftermath back at the underground bunker, Jack's team regathered. They were battered, bruised, and scarred, but they were alive. The mission had been a success, but the cost was high. Jack stood in the center of the room, his hands shaking for the first time in days. He'd led his people to victory, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. "We've done the impossible," Maddox said, clapping Jack on the back. "But the war's just begun. Kestrel won't stop until they wipe us out. We need to stay one step ahead." Jack nodded, staring at the map of Kestrel's operations. "We will, but we need to make sure everyone knows what Kestrel really is. We go public. We expose them to the world." There was a long silence. They all knew the consequences of that decision. But they also knew one thing for sure. Kestrel had to fall. Victory was supposed to feel like a relief, but as Jack sat in the dimly lit room of their underground shelter, it felt more like a heavy weight on his shoulders. The adrenaline from the raid had worn off, and the toll of the battle was starting to sink in. They had crippled Kestrel, but Jack knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The team had returned to the bunker, and everyone was still processing the chaos. The wounded had been treated, the dead mourned, but in the silence that hung over them, the question lingered. What now? The calm. Before the storm, the days following the raid were filled with an uneasy quiet. The media had picked up the story of Kestrel's fall, but the headlines had quickly been buried beneath the corporate spin. Kestrel's PR machine was relentless, painting them as victims of a senseless attack by a rogue group of radicals. But Jack knew the truth. He had the evidence, and soon the world would know it too. As he sat in the war room reviewing the intel Maddox had secured from the Kestrel compound, he felt a sense of dread creeping in. They had struck at the heart of the beast, but the beast was still alive and it was angry. "Jack," Maddox said, his voice grave as he entered the room, breaking Jack from his thoughts. "We've got a problem. Kestrel's mobilizing. They've got a larger force coming. Our way. I'm talking military grade. We're not dealing with mercenaries anymore." Jack's gaze hardened. He'd known it was coming, but hearing it confirmed made it real. The storm was closing in. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy," Jack said, his voice low but resolute. "But we can't let them push us back. We stand our ground." An unexpected visitor. Just as Jack was about to give the order to begin preparing defenses, a car pulled up outside the bunker. A black SUV, heavily armored. Jack's instincts flared. Whoever was coming was no ordinary visitor. The door opened, and out stepped a tall, imposing figure. It was General Cooper. "What the hell is he doing here?" Maddox muttered under his breath. Jack exchanged a glance with his team, but he didn't hesitate. He walked to the door, his hand on his weapon. "Just in case." As Cooper approached, Jack's eyes narrowed, unsure of what to expect. "General," Jack said, his tone neutral but cautious. "What brings you to Dry Creek?" Cooper gave a tight smile, his eyes hard. "I've been in contact with your people. I don't like what I'm hearing. Kestrel is far from finished, and neither are the enemies you're about to make. But I've got something that might help." Jack didn't trust Cooper, he never had. But in this moment he was willing to listen. "What do you mean?" "I've got access to a private network. People with resources and connections who are willing to help you," Cooper said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you're going to need more than a small band of soldiers if you want to keep this fight going. Kestrel's coming for you and they won't stop until you're dead." The proposal Cooper's offer was simple. In exchange for a partnership, he would provide the team with access to a network of elite mercenaries and tactical specialists, people who had experience fighting wars on a scale Jack and his team had never encountered. But there was a catch. Cooper wanted something in return. "I'm not asking for your loyalty, Jack," Cooper said, his eyes cold. "I'm asking for your trust. You'll have the resources you need, but you'll have to follow my lead. I know how to play this game." Jack's mind raced. The offer was tempting, but there was something about Cooper that didn't sit right. The man was a survivor, willing to do whatever it took to get what he wanted. "You're asking us to hand over control," Jack said, his voice rising. "I don't work for anyone." Cooper didn't flinch. "Then I guess you'll have to. Make a choice. Fight alone and risk losing everything, or accept my help and play the game smarter." Jack was silent for a moment. The truth was, they didn't have the luxury of time. The enemy was closing in, and they were far from ready. "I'll think about it," Jack said, finally turning away. "But I'm not making any promises." Turning the tide that night, as Jack sat alone in his quarters, staring at the map of the battlefield, the weight of the decision he had to make settled heavily on him. He knew that they had no chance of winning this fight without the right resources. Kestrel had everything: money, military backing, influence. But what they didn't have was the will to fight for what mattered. Jack clenched his fists. Dry Creek wasn't just his home, it was a symbol of everything that was worth fighting for. The people he loved, the land they had fought to protect, the freedom they had earned through sweat and blood. He couldn't let that fall into Kestrel's hands. "General Cooper may be our best chance," Jack muttered to himself. "But I won't let him control us." A desperate gamble. The following morning, Jack gathered his team in the war room. They had received the intel. Kestrel was coming for them, and they were bringing everything they had. The next few days would determine the future of Dry Creek and possibly the future of everyone who had ever crossed Kestrel's path. "Here's the deal," Jack said, his voice unwavering. "We've got an ally, Cooper, but he's going to want control. We need to make sure we're not just pawns in his game. We'll take his resources, but we'll make the decisions. Are you with me?" The team exchanged looks, but there was no hesitation. They knew the risks, but they also knew the stakes. "We're with you, Jack," Maddox said, stepping forward. The others nodded in agreement. They had been through too, much together to back down now. Betrayal unveiled. As preparations for the final showdown began, Jack's thoughts kept drifting back to Luke. The unease he had seen in his friend's eyes hadn't left him. Luke had been quiet for days, and Jack knew something was wrong. That afternoon, Jack pulled Luke aside. "What's going on, man? You've been distant lately." Luke looked at him, his eyes shadowed with something Jack couldn't quite place. For a moment, it seemed like Luke was going to say something important. Then, with a heavy sigh, Luke said, "I've been in contact with Kestrel." Jack's heart sank. "What? You—" "I didn't mean for it to happen," Luke continued, his voice barely a whisper. "They've got information on me. They're threatening my family. I didn't know who else to turn to." Jack took a step back, his chest tightening. "You're working with them?" Luke shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I never wanted this. I had to do it to keep them safe." The betrayal stung like a physical blow, but Jack fought to keep his emotions in check. "We'll deal with this. Together. No one betrays us, Luke. No one." The countdown begins. With the tension escalating, Jack knew they were running out of time. Kestrel's forces were coming. The battle for Dry Creek had begun, and there would be no turning back. As the sun set over the horizon, Jack stood at the edge of town, staring out at the empty fields. The quiet before the storm seemed almost unbearable, but he knew one thing for sure. This was his fight now, and he would fight to the very end. The tension in Dry Creek was unbearable. The quiet hum of the night, the rustling of the trees, and the distant calls of coyotes were the only sounds that broke the stillness. It was the calm before the storm, a storm that would either wash everything away or leave Dry Creek standing tall, victorious against all odds. Jack stood outside the makeshift command center, watching the horizon. His thoughts were a whirlwind, a storm inside his mind. The decision he had made to partner with General Cooper now weighed heavily on him. The betrayal by Luke stung, and the memory of those moments still lingered like a shadow, but there was no time for regret. The only thing that mattered now was the fight ahead. The countdown, "Time's up." Maddox's voice cut through the silence, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He looked over to see Maddox, his face grim but determined, holding up a tablet displaying the Kestrel satellite feed. "They're here," Maddox continued. "We've got at least 100 of them. They're coming in fast." Jack nodded. "No turning back now. Get everyone in position." The team moved with precision, each member knowing their role. The mercenaries they had enlisted, with Cooper's connections, were positioned around the perimeter, setting up barricades, fortifying positions, and preparing to face whatever Kestrel had brought. The terrain around Dry Creek, rocky, harsh, unforgiving, was their advantage. Kestrel's advanced forces might have superior firepower, but they didn't know this land like Jack's people did. Inside the bunker, Luke sat by the radio equipment, his eyes scanning the monitors. Jack hadn't spoken to him since their confrontation. There was too much at stake, too much distrust. But now Luke's presence was necessary. They needed every hand on deck. "You good?" Jack asked, his voice cold but steady. Luke nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm with you. I'll do my part." That was all Jack needed to hear. For now, they were allies again. But if they survived this, things would have to change. The battle begins. At first, it was quiet, just the sound of vehicles approaching in the distance. The low hum of engines reverberated through the ground. Jack's hand tightened around the rifle he had been holding. This was it. This was what they had trained for. Everything they had worked for was leading up to this one moment. "Incoming!" Nolan shouted from the east. "They're on the move!" The first shots rang out, breaking the silence with deafening violence. The team responded with immediate precision, opening fire on the advancing Kestrel forces. Explosions lit up the night as both sides exchanged fire, the crack of gunshots, mingling with the whine of rockets. Jack led the charge, his team moving in sync like a well-rehearsed dance. They held the high ground, picking off Kestrel's troops one by one as they tried to advance. The mercenaries they'd enlisted were fierce, but even with superior numbers, Kestrel wasn't getting through this unscathed. But Jack knew this was only the beginning. Betrayal and revelation, as the battle raged on, Jack's mind kept returning to Luke. Something felt wrong. The uneasy feeling Jack had been trying to suppress all along crept back up, and then Through the chaos of the firefight, he saw it. Luke wasn't at his post by the radio. Panic rose in Jack's chest, but he pushed it down. Focus. They were in the thick of it now. It wasn't just the fight against Kestrel they had to worry about. It was the fight within their own ranks. "Jack!" Maddox yelled as he ducked behind a barricade, gunfire whizzing overhead. "We've got a bigger problem. Look at the southeast. They're bringing in heavy artillery." Jack didn't hesitate. "We need to take that out, now," he signaled to Nolan and a few of the mercenaries. They split off to intercept the artillery vehicles while Jack kept pushing forward. But just as they were about to engage, something unexpected happened. "Jack, it's me. I've got something to show you." Luke's voice crackled over the radio. His tone was almost too calm, too controlled. "Luke, where the hell are you?" Jack growled. "I'm at the east flank, but you need to see what I've uncovered." Jack's pulse quickened. "What the hell do you mean uncovered, Luke? Kestrel's not here to fight us. They're here to cover something bigger." Luke's voice was low, as if afraid someone would overhear. "They're setting up a nuclear warhead." Jack's stomach twisted into a knot. "A what?" "The whole point of the attack," Luke continued, "is to get us to destroy the one thing they're really after, the warhead." Jack's heart raced. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Kestrel wasn't just after Dry Creek. They were after something much more devastating. The stakes had just been raised to an unimaginable level. The choice Jack stood frozen for a moment, processing the information. If Luke was right, everything they had done, everything they had fought for, was about to be erased in one fatal blow. Dry Creek wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for the world. "We can't let them get that warhead out of here." Jack's voice was steel. "Everyone pull back to the east flank. We take that warhead out or this fight is over." Final confrontation. The team regrouped quickly, rallying at the east flank where they could hear the rumble of Kestrel's military machines pushing forward. Jack could see it now. Through the smoke and chaos of the battlefield, the massive, a structure that housed the warhead. Kestrel's top commanders were guarding the perimeter, their faces twisted with determination, knowing this was their moment to end it all. But Jack wouldn't let them win. Not after everything. Not after the lives lost, the sacrifices made. With Maddox and Nolan covering his back, Jack moved toward the warhead. The explosions in the distance seemed to fade away as he neared his target. "Stay close," Jack ordered, his voice steady as he prepared to breach the compound. They were close, so close. The endgame. They fought their way inside, pushing through. The final defenses with everything they had. The last remaining Kestrel forces were desperate to hold them off, but it was clear that the tide had turned. Jack reached the warhead. It was massive, glistening with ominous power. He could almost feel the weight of it, the potential devastation it could unleash if they failed. As he activated the disabling mechanism, everything seemed to slow down. For one moment, he could almost see it, the life they had built, the love, the hope, disappearing in a flash. But he didn't let that fear take hold. "Not now. Get back," Jack shouted as he disabled the countdown. The final moments, Kestrel's forces were falling back, and Jack's team had won the battle. But as Jack stood there, surrounded by smoke and chaos, he realized something. The fight wasn't over. Not truly. The world would know what Kestrel had done, and the consequences of their actions would echo far and wide. As the warhead was safely deactivated, Jack's team gathered together one last time. They had won, but it had cost them everything. They had been tested, torn apart, and rebuilt, but they were still standing. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt something deep within him, a sense of peace. They had made it through the storm. The story of Jack and his team came to a close, but their journey, both the battles they fought and the lives they saved, would live on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Thank you for reading. The fight is over, but the journey continues.